Respected, there is a moment in every person's life, a quiet, painful, almost invisible moment where they look in the mirror and realize that the only thing standing between them and everything they've ever dreamed of is themselves. That moment right there, that's where discipline is born. Not in a gym, not in a morning routine, not in a 5 a.m. alarm clock, in that mirror, in that silence, in that truth. And today, I want to talk to you about something that nobody, and I mean nobody, is telling you about discipline. Not your favorite influencer, not the podcast you've been listening to, not even the people who love you most. Because the truth about discipline is uncomfortable, it's messy, and it doesn't look anything like what they've been selling you on the internet. So if you're ready to hear the real thing, stay with me. Because what I'm about to share with you changed my life, and I believe with everything in me, it's going to change yours too. Let me take you somewhere first. I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Well, don't actually close them because you need to hear this. But I want you to imagine a man, a young man, sitting in a beat-up car on the side of a cold road in Cleveland, Ohio. No home, no money, no food, just a Bible, a few changes of clothes stuffed in a garbage bag in the back seat, and a dream so big it almost felt embarrassing to say out loud. That man was me. I was 27 years old. And most people who knew me at that time would have told you politely, kindly, but honestly that Steve Harvey was not going to make it. I had already failed at more things than most people had even tried. I had been a boxer, didn't make it. I had sold insurance, got fired. I had worked in carpet cleaning and auto workers' factories and mail rooms, and every single time something fell apart. Every single time the dream felt a little further away. And you want to know what the world told me every time I fell down? Get up, work harder, be more disciplined. And so I tried. Lord knows I tried. I made schedules. I set goals. I wrote lists. I forced myself through routines that felt like punishment. I did everything the books told me to do, and still nothing. Still the empty pockets. Still the broken relationships. Still the cold nights in that car wondering if maybe everyone else was right about me. It wasn't until years later, the years of pain, years of failure, years of sitting in that darkness, that I finally understood what nobody had ever told me about discipline. And when I got it, really got it in my spirit, everything changed. Now, before I tell you what that thing is, I need to back up, because I think we've been taught discipline all wrong. And when you're taught something wrong from the beginning, it doesn't matter how hard you try, you're always going to end up in the wrong place. Think about how you were introduced to the word discipline as a child. For most of us, discipline meant punishment. It meant somebody was in trouble. It meant something bad was about to happen. Your mama said, "I'm going to discipline you," and that was not a good sign. It meant restriction. It meant pain. It meant that some kind of freedom was about to be taken away. And then you grew up, and the world handed you a different version of that same story. They said discipline is about control. It's about forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do. It's about willpower and resistance and gritting your teeth through discomfort. It's about denying yourself pleasure and pushing through pain and being harder on yourself too. Have anyone else ever could be. And so we all went out here trying to white-knuckle our way through life. We set these brutal alarms. We made these impossible schedules. We swore off every joy, every comfort, every moment of rest. And for about a week, maybe two, it worked. We felt strong. We felt in control. We felt like we were finally becoming the person we were supposed to be. And then life happened. A bad day came. The unexpected bill arrived. The relationship got hard. The body got tired. The motivation dried up like water in the desert. And we fell off. And then you know what we did? We blamed ourselves. We said we weren't disciplined enough. We said we didn't want it bad enough. We said something was fundamentally broken inside of us. But I'm here to tell you today that the problem was never you. The problem was the definition. See, for the longest time, I thought discipline was about doing, about action, about forcing behavior. And I see so many people right now walking around with that same misunderstanding, and it is costing them everything. They're disciplined in their routine, but completely undisciplined in their mind. They wake up at 5 a.m., but they spend the first ST hour comparing themselves to strangers on social media. They meal prep on Sunday, but they feed their spirit nothing but doubt and fear all week long. They hustle 16 hours a day, but they've never once sat still long enough to ask themselves why they're running or where they're actually trying to go. That's not discipline. That's performance. And performance without purpose is just exhausting. I know because I lived it. When I was sleeping in that car in Cleveland, I had plenty of time to think. And at first, all my thinking was about action. What do I do next? Where do I go? How do I hustle my way out of this? I was a man desperately focused on behavior, on the doing of things, because I thought if I just did enough, eventually something would break my way. But one night I remember it like it was yesterday. I was sitting in that car, and it was so cold I could see my own breath. And I opened my Bible, and I came across a scripture that I had read 100 times before, but this time it landed different. It said, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Not as a man does, not as a man works, not as a man hustles 16 hours. A day, as a man thinketh." And something cracked open inside me that night. Because I realized that I had been trying to discipline my schedule, my habits, my actions, but I had never once tried to discipline my mind, my heart, the thing underneath all the doing, the thing that was driving everything else. That is the one thing nobody tells you about discipline. Real discipline, the kind that actually changes your life, the kind that doesn't require motivation or perfect conditions or a streak you're afraid to break. Real discipline starts on the inside. It starts in your identity, in the story you believe about yourself, in the voice that speaks to you when the room is quiet and nobody else is watching, in the picture you hold of yourself when you close your eyes and ask the question, who am I really? Because here's what I've learned, and I've learned it the hard way so that maybe you don't have to. You will never out-discipline your self-image. Let me say that again because this might be the most important thing you hear today. You will never out-discipline your self-image. If deep in your heart you believe you are someone who always quits, you will quit. Doesn't matter how hard your system is. Doesn't matter how expensive your planner is. Doesn't matter how many accountability partners you have. That deep belief will always win. Always. Because the mind is more powerful than any routine you've ever tried to build. If deep down you believe you don't deserve success, and so many of us carry that belief without even knowing it, it was put there by somebody who hurt us or failed us or told us we weren't enough. If you carry that belief, your discipline will always eventually collapse. Because subconsciously you will sabotage every structure you try to build. You will find excuses. You will manufacture obstacles. You will make sure that your life matches what you believe about yourself. Because the mind cannot tolerate the contradiction between what you do and what you believe for very long. This is why you see people who have every resource, every opportunity, every advantage in the world, and they still can't seem to get it together. And then you see people who come from nothing, who had every reason to fail, who had the whole world against them, and they build something extraordinary. The difference is not their schedule. It's not their habits. It's not their morning routine. It's what they believe about themselves at the deepest, most unshakable level of who they are. I've sat across from some of the most successful people in the world. I've had conversations with billionaires, with Hall of Fame athletes, with artists who've sold 100 million records. And I can tell you something that every single one of them has in common. It's not talent. Talent is common. There are talented people struggling everywhere you look. It's not even hard work. There are hard-working people who are exhausted and broken, wondering what they're doing wrong. What every truly successful person I've ever known has in common is this. They believed in their vision before there was any evidence to support it. They were disciplined in their mind first. They told themselves a story about who they were and who they were becoming, and they absolutely refused to let circumstances rewrite that story. Now, I want to be careful here because I know somebody is watching this right now is thinking, Steve, that sounds like positive thinking. That sounds like just believing your way to success. And I want to look you right in the eye and tell you, that is not what I'm saying. Faith without works is dead. I know that. I live that. I am a living testimony to the fact that you've got to do the work. The dream doesn't build itself. The vision doesn't pay the bills on its own. But here is the thing, and this is so critical here, is the thing that changes everything. When your inner life is disciplined, when your mind is right, when your identity is rooted in something true and powerful and unshakable, the outer work becomes different. It doesn't feel like torture. It doesn't feel like white-knuckling your way through another week. It feels like purpose. It feels like calling. It feels like you're building something that belongs to you, something that's connected to who you actually are. The work doesn't get easier necessarily, but it gets meaningful. And meaningful hard work is completely different from meaningless hard work. Meaningful hard work builds you up even as it challenges you. Meaningless hard work just grinds you down until there's nothing left. I want to tell you something about that car in Cleveland. The moment everything started to shift for me was not the moment I booked my first big comedy gig. It was not the moment I walked out on stage for the first time at a club where people actually laughed. It was not the moment I got a call back or a contract or a check. The moment everything started to shift was a moment that nobody saw. It was a moment when I was sitting in that car, and instead of asking, what do I need to do, I asked a different question. I asked, who am I? And I sat with that question, really sat with it. Not the version of me that had failed, not the version of me that was living in a car, not the version of me that all those people had given up on, but the version of me that I believed God had put on this earth to be. And I said to myself out loud in that cold car, with no audience, no validation, no evidence, I said, I am a man of God. I am funny. I was created to make people laugh, to lift people up, to inspire people. I am going to be one of the greatest entertainers who ever lived. And the interesting thing is, I cried when I said it because it felt so far from where I was in that moment. It felt almost delusional, but I said it anyway. And then I said it the next day and the day after that. And slowly over time, something started to happen, not just in my the stances, in me. I started to carry myself differently. I started to make decisions differently. The discipline didn't feel like a foreign language anymore. It felt like an expression of who I was, because I had decided in my mind and my heart at the deepest level that this was who I was. And disciplined people do what it takes. That's just who they are. That, my friend, is the foundation. Before the routine comes the identity. Before the habits come the beliefs. Before the action comes the inner work that makes the action sustainable, meaningful, and ultimately transformative. And that is the one thing that nobody is putting on the cover of their course, or in the title of their book, or in the thumbnail of their YouTube video. Because it's not sexy. It's not a hack. It's not a system. It doesn't come with a template or a tracker or a 30-day challenge. It is simply the hard, sacred, deeply personal work of deciding who you are. And then having the courage, the real courage, the kind that doesn't ask for applause, of living that truth every single day, even when it's hard, even when nobody's watching, even when the results haven't arrived yet, even when the circa R is cold and the road is long and you can't see the destination. That is real discipline. And everything I want to share with you in this conversation today flows from that foundation. Because once you understand this, once you really feel it in your bones, the rest of what we're about to talk about is going to make a different kind of sense, a deeper sense. The kind of sense that doesn't just motivate you for a week and then fade. The kind of sense that reshapes how you see yourself and your life from this moment forward. There's something I want you to understand before we go any further. What I shared with you in part one, that business about identity, about the inside work, about who you believe yourself to be, that is not the comfortable part of this conversation. And I know some of you heard it and something stirred inside you. Something said, yes, that's it, that's what I've been missing. And then almost immediately another voice came in, a quieter voice, a more familiar voice. And that voice said, but you don't really know if you can do it. I know that voice. I know it intimately. I grew up with that voice. I carried that voice with me into adulthood. And for a long time, I made the mistake of believing that voice was telling me the truth. Today, I want to talk to you about that voice, because here is the second thing that nobody tells you about discipline, and this one is even harder to hear than the first. The reason most people can't stay disciplined is not because they're lazy. It's not because they're weak. It's not because they don't want it badly enough. The reason most people can't stay disciplined is because they are unconsciously loyal to their pain. Read that again. Sit with it. Let it breathe. Unconsciously loyal to their pain. Now, I know that sounds harsh. I know somebody right now wants to push back on that, and I understand. Because nobody wants to believe that they're holding on to the very thing that's hurting them. Nobody wants to believe that they've built a life around a wound. But I've been in enough rooms, I've talked to enough people, I've been in enough dark seasons of my own life to know that this is one of the most common and most devastating truths that human beings never confront. Let me explain what I mean. When you go through something painful, and all of us have, every single person watching this has walked through the fire of some kind. When you go through something painful, your mind does something remarkable. It builds a story around that pain to help you make sense of it, to help you survive it. And that story becomes part of how you see the world, part of how you see yourself. Maybe somebody left you when you needed them most, and your mind built a story that said people can't be trusted. And that story protected you. It kept you from being vulnerable again. It kept you from being hurt in the same way twice. And in the short term, that felt like wisdom. It felt like strength. But 10 years later, 20 years later, that same story is keeping you from the deep connections that would transform your life. It's keeping you isolated. It's keeping you from the partnerships, the collaborations, the relationships that success requires. And now it's not protection anymore. Now it's a prison. And you didn't even see the bars go up because they went up so gradually, so quietly, that they felt like just the way things are. Or maybe somebody told you when you were young that you weren't smart enough. Maybe a teacher wrote you off. Maybe a parent, even a well-meaning one, communicated in 1,000. The small ways that your dreams were too big for someone like you. And your mind built a story around that too. A story that said, I have to be careful. I can't risk too much. I can't put myself out there fully because if I fail, it will only prove what they already said about me. And so you stayed in the safe lane. You played small. You disciplined yourself in the wrong direction, building walls instead of bridges, managing risk instead of chasing vision, making sure you were always protected instead of ever being truly free. And here's the cruelest part of all of this. The cruelest part is that the pain becomes comfortable. Not pleasant, I'm not saying pleasant, but comfortable in the way that anything familiar becomes comfortable over time. Even the things that are killing us slowly can feel like home simply because we've lived there long enough. That's why change is so hard. Not because the new thing is impossible, but because the old thing, as painful as it is known. And the human spirit will choose familiar pain over unfamiliar possibility almost every time unless something radical happens. Unless there is a moment of absolute clarity. Unless somebody speaks the truth to you with enough love and enough force that you cannot unhear it. That's what I'm trying to do right now. I want to tell you about a period in my life after I had started to find some success. People think my story is just about getting out of the car, getting on stage, and riding it all the way to the top. They make it sound simple. They make it sound like once the struggle was over, the journey was smooth. But what most people don't know is that some of my hardest seasons came after I started winning. Because when you start to rise, something strange happens. You start to bump into all the internal work that the struggle kept you distracted from. When you're just trying to survive, you don't have time to examine your wounds. You're in survival mode. Every ounce of energy is going towards staying alive, staying in the game. But when the pressure lifts a little, when the bills are paid and the lights are on and you're not sleeping in a car anymore, when the survival noise quiets down, you finally hear all the stuff you've been running from. And if you haven't done the inside work, if you haven't dealt with the pain and the stories and the wounds, they will follow you right into you. Your success, and they will mess it up. I'm not going to stand in front of you and pretend I got everything right. I'm not going to give you a sanitized version of my story that leaves out the failures and the broken relationships and the moments where I sabotage good things because deep down, I didn't fully believe I deserved them. I have made mistakes that still hurt to think about. I have let people down who deserve better from me. I have brought old pain into new seasons and paid a tremendous price for it. But I am also living proof that you can do the work. You can confront those stories. You can be honest with yourself about the ways you've been unconsciously loyal to your pain, and you can make a different choice. That choice, that moment of radical honesty and radical courage, is what real discipline looks like at its most foundational level. Now, I want to talk to you about something that is deeply connected to all of this, because I think it is one of the most misunderstood concepts in the entire conversation about success and discipline. I want to talk about consistency. Everybody talks about consistency. You hear it everywhere. Be consistent. Stay consistent. Consistency is the key, and they're not wrong. Consistency is powerful. But here's what they never explain. Here's the part that gets left out every single time. Consistency is not a strategy. Consistency is an outcome. Let me say that again because I need you to really hear it. Consistency is not a strategy. Consistency is an outcome. You cannot decide to be consistent the same way you decide to wake up at 5 a.m. Consistency is what happens naturally when everything else is aligned, when your identity is right, when your inner story matches the direction you're trying to go, when you're not unconsciously sabotaging yourself, when you're not fighting against your own deepest beliefs every single day. When all of that is in order, consistency doesn't feel like discipline. It feels like breathing. I've watched so many people over the years try to force consistency, and it is painful to watch because they're working so hard. They're using every ounce of willpower they have. And for a while, it looks impressive from the outside, but you can see it in their eyes, the exhaustion of fighting themselves every single day. The constant battle between who they're trying to be and who they deep do. We believe they are. That battle will break you. I don't care how mentally tough you are. I don't care how many motivational speeches you've listened to. You cannot sustain the effort of being at war with yourself indefinitely. Something will give. And usually what gives is the discipline. The person quits, and then they come back and they try harder this time, and they quit again, and the cycle repeats. And every cycle leaves them a little more defeated, a little more convinced that something is fundamentally wrong with them, that they are just one of those people who can't do it. but they are not broken. They are misaligned. And misalignment is fixable. You just have to be willing to do the real work instead of the surface work. Let me give you a picture of what this actually looks like in practice. Think about someone you know, maybe it's you, and that's okay, there's no judgment here. Think about someone who has tried to get healthy for years. They've started the diet 100 times. They've joined the gym and quit the gym and joined again. They bought the equipment, the apps, the programs, the cookbooks. They've had the motivation, had the conversation with themselves, had the breakthrough moment where they swear this time is different. And then 3 weeks in, it falls apart again. Now the world looks at that person and says they don't have discipline. They're lazy. They don't want it bad enough. But I want to ask a different question. I want to ask, what story is that person living underneath the attempts? Because there is always a story underneath the attempts. Maybe that person grew up in a home where food was love, where eating together was the primary way the family connected, and so changing their relationship with food feels in some deep, unspoken way like a betrayal of the people they love. Maybe they carry a belief that taking care of themselves is selfish because they were raised to put everyone else first, and so every time they start to prioritize their health, guilt pulls them back. Maybe they don't actually believe at the deepest level that they deserve to feel good in their body. And so success in that area triggers an unconscious response that finds a way to undo it. None of those stories are about laziness. None of them are about not wanting it enough. All of them are about pain that was never examined and stories that were never are challenged. And until you challenge the story, you will keep replaying the cycle, because the cycle is not a discipline problem. It is a belief problem. This is why I am so passionate about the inside work. Not because I am some soft feelings first kind of person, ask anyone who knows me. That is not my reputation, but because I have watched too many good people work themselves half to death, chasing goals they will never reach because they refuse to do the one thing that would actually make the difference. They refuse to get honest, not with their friends, not with their Instagram followers, not even with their spouse or their pastor or their therapist. Honestly, genuinely, painfully honest with themselves. That conversation, the one you have with yourself when it's 2 in the morning and there's nobody around to perform for that, is the most important conversation of your life. And most people are terrified of it because that conversation has a way of revealing things you've been working very hard not to see. It will show you where you've been running from instead of running toward. It will show you the permission slips you've been issuing yourself to stay stuck. It will to show you the people you've been blaming for limitations that you now have the power to overcome. It will show you the dream you abandoned not because it was impossible, but because believing in it felt too dangerous. It will show you who you have been making yourself small for and why. That conversation is uncomfortable. That conversation takes courage. But on the other side of that conversation is the most liberated, most powerful, most authentically disciplined version of yourself that you have ever encountered. I want to tell you about the moment I had that conversation with myself in a real and lasting way. Not just in that car in Cleveland that was the beginning, but the moment I went deeper. I was sitting with a mentor of mine, a man I respected deeply, a man who had seen me through some of my lowest seasons. And he said something to me that rearranged my whole world. He looked me in the eye and he said, "Steve, you spend a lot of energy trying to prove people wrong. And I want to ask you what happens when you don't have anyone to prove wrong anymore. What are you running toward when there's no one to run from?" And I sat there and I didn't have an answer. Because the honorable EST truth was that for years, a significant portion of my drive, my discipline, my relentlessness, my refusal to quit was fueled by anger, by the need to prove everyone who doubted me wrong, by a wound that I had turned into a weapon, and that weapon was effective. It got me places. It pushed me through walls, but it also cost me. It cost me relationships. It cost me peace. It cost me the ability to enjoy what I had built while I was building it, because I was always running too fast to stop and breathe and be grateful. When my mentor asked me that question, I realized that I needed to do a different kind of work, not the discipline of pushing harder, the discipline of going deeper, the discipline of dealing with the wound beneath the drive and finding a purer, more sustainable, more joyful reason to keep going. And I found it. It took time. It took prayer. It took a lot of long, uncomfortable conversations with myself and with God. But I found it. And when I did, my discipline stopped feeling like war. It started feeling like worship. That's the word I want to leave you with as we close out this section. Worship. When your discipline is rooted in who you truly are, not in fear, not in pain, not in the need to prove something to someone who hurt you, but in a genuine, deep, soul-level belief that you were made for something meaningful, Then showing up every day stops being a grind. It becomes an act of gratitude. It becomes a way of honoring the gifts you were given and the life you were entrusted with. People who are disciplined in that way, and I've had the privilege of knowing some of them, they have a different energy. It's quiet, it's steady. It doesn't fluctuate with the highs and lows of external results because they're not doing it for the results anymore. They're doing it because it's who they are. Because to not do it would be to betray something sacred in themselves. That is the level of discipline I'm talking about. That is the level that nobody is teaching you because you can't package it. You can't sell it in a course. You can't put it in a 30-day challenge. It is personal. It is spiritual. It is the work of a lifetime, but it is available to you right now, today. In whatever condition you find yourself in, whatever your history, whatever you've done or failed to do, whatever they said about you or whatever you've said about the self, the door to that level of discipline is always open. The only question is whether you're willing to walk through it.